It must be really embarrassing to accidentally fall through a wall or blow your quads out so you can't walk, or even get set on fire and burned to a crisp. What must be even more embarrassing is for that to happen in front of a live audience of thousands and millions around the world watching on pay-per-view. In this list, we'll have a look at wrestling's biggest unplanned disasters to happen in front of a live audience. A warning first though that some of the items on this list are far more serious than others. So we'll start off with the relatively light stuff and deal with the slightly more horrible, depressing stuff at the end of the list. Like Vince McMahon didn't have enough on his mind in May 1996, what with Scott Hall and Kevin Nash leaving the company and WCW starting to become a real threat, then he gets a power outage live on pay-per-view. Luckily, the show was mostly crap, with such matches as the Smoking Guns versus the Godwins, Mark Miro versus Triple H, and a no contest between Shawn Michaels and the British Bulldog for the WWE title. That all happened on May the 26th as a storm roared through Florence, South Carolina, cutting the power out to the building. According to Bruce Pritchard, they initially thought the power cut was an ambush from WCW, which does seem quite funny now, but it was more paranoid times back then obviously. The rest of the show took place on May the 28th. No doubt WWE started to bring a backup generator with them. We can't talk about disasters happening in front of a live audience without discussing the Shockmaster. Fred Ottman, better known as Typhoon and Tugboat, was the mystery partner in a 1993 War Games match alongside Sting, the Bulldog and Dustin Rhodes. The big reveal for the mystery partner came at Clash of the Champions, where Sting excitedly announced, "Our partner is going to shock the world because he is none other than the Shockmaster." That was the cue for the Shockmaster to debut, but he ended up crashing through a wall, dropped his glittery Stormtrooper helmet and awaited his pre-recorded lines to play over the arena PA system. The Shockmaster would go down in wrestling infamy from that moment onwards, for all the wrong reasons. For a man who notoriously hates sneezing, this must have been a very frustrating moment for Vince McMahon. It was the 2005 Royal Rumble and no doubt his hackles were already up as the end to the Royal Rumble match was botched. Batista was meant to win, however by chance both he and John Cena went over the top rope at exactly the same time, causing the chairman of the board to march down to the ring in order to sort the mess out. He wouldn't be marching for very long however, as when he tried to slide into the ring, somehow both of his quads were torn. It was a hilarious sight, and McMahon had to sit in the ring to give his orders instead. From his position sat down, the match was restarted, allowing Batista to pick up the win and eventually go on to defeat Triple H at WrestleMania 21 for the world title. At WrestleMania 22 in 2006, the culmination of a memorable storyline saw Trish Stratus take on Mickie James for the Women's Championship. James had debuted in WWE in 2005 and participated in an angle that saw her become obsessed with Stratus, stalking her at every turn, where week after week it became more and more obvious that she wanted to be more than just friends. Mickie James was about a decade ahead of the women's revolution, both in terms of wrestling ability and character work, and she was so believable in the role of the besotted psychopath here. Perhaps she was just a bit too believable. The match itself was good, if a little short at 8 minutes long. Anyway, at one point during the match, James grabs the crotch of Stratus before licking her fingers. It was an action that would have even seemed a bit too much during the Attitude Era. According to Mickie James, Vince absolutely lost his shit over this move backstage. She said, "I came back through the curtain and Vince was really mad. In the moment, it had seemed amazing to me. I thought, Vince will love this. Crass was the word I got. He didn't like it at all. He told me, we're going to have to go back and edit that out. Do you know how much time this is going to take? Bloody hell, Vince, make your mind up. I thought you loved that kind of stuff. If you play with fire, then you might get burned, or so the saying goes, and The Undertaker found that out the hard way at the Elimination Chamber in 2010. As if the Elimination Chamber itself isn't grueling enough, The Undertaker got set on fire by his own pyro on the way down to the ring. It wasn't his fault, apparently it was the fault of the effects guy backstage, and Taker was not a happy dead man. He said, "I'm usually a very forgiving and understanding person, but a couple of weeks prior to that incident I had a conversation with the pyro guy and told him, look, the pyro burst is too close, I'm starting to feel it. I said, let's back them out." And actually, he had every right to be unhappy, as he suffered legitimate first-degree burns and had to stay in the Elimination Chamber pod for a full 20 minutes, where he constantly doused himself in water to relieve the no doubt excruciating pain. Safe to say, that pyro guy was fired. Given their reputation backstage, I always wondered whether it was more of a blessing than a curse for McMahon that Kevin Nash and Scott Hall defected to WCW in 1996. Those guys, alongside Shawn Michaels, Triple H and Sean Waltman, made up the Kliq, a bunch of mates that ran roughshod backstage in the mid-90s. Before breaking up the friendship, the boys decided to embrace on a house show in front of thousands of fans. Nothing wrong with that, you might think, just friends saying bye to each other, right? Wrong. Vince McMahon was furious for reasons I've never quite understood. Point being that some of the Kliq were heels and some of them were faces, and they'd variously feuded with each other on TV in the months and years previous. Vince didn't want the fans to see behind the curtain and see heels and faces hugging each other, essentially. Bearing in mind that this was the mid-90s WWE, which was home to such nonsense as Max Moon, who hailed from the future, and Mantar, a living Minotaur, I don't think there were many fans left believing WWE was a legitimate sports league. It was a moment that changed WWE forever and mentally affected Bret Hart for life. The Montreal Screwjob is still remembered and referenced as one of wrestling's most shocking real-life moments, and it played out to millions of fans around the world, live on pay-per-view. Hart was on the way out to WCW on a promise of millions of dollars when the Survivor Series in 1997 rolled around. And while he'd rather have stayed in WWE, Vince McMahon could not get anywhere near the dollar amount, so advised him to take Eric Bischoff's offer. Only problem was, Hart was still WWE champion and didn't want to drop the belt in front of his Canadian fans that night at the Survivor Series in Montreal. McMahon didn't want to take the chance that Hart might take the belt with him to WCW and then drop it in the trash, or even worse, just as Medusa had done a couple of years previously. So during the match, while Shawn Michaels had Hart in the sharpshooter, McMahon called for the bell, even though Hart didn't tap, going against the agreement from earlier in the night that Hart would win the match. On the night, most fans went away somewhat confused, but as the shocking truth quickly emerged, everyone took a side. Did Vince screw Bret, or did Bret screw Bret? For our final 3 entries, things get a bit more serious on this list. A lot more serious, actually. Let's start with Jerry Lawler's heart attack live on an episode of Raw from 2012. As Lawler and Michael Cole routinely called a match, Lawler briefly fell silent and then began to snore loudly, in Cole's words, and incredibly, Lawler was clinically dead for a short amount of time. Michael Cole was forced to try and maintain composure and call the match in the ring as EMTs were scrambled to bring Lawler backstage. Lawler would eventually make a full recovery and a decade later is still going strong, but for a few minutes it seemed as though the wrestling world had lost a legend that Monday night on live TV. Wrestling's a dangerous business when you stop and think about it, as was proven during a SmackDown taping in October 1999 in front of thousands of fans. Droz was wrestling D'Lo Brown when in the flash of a moment, Droz was permanently paralysed from the neck down. Brown attempted a powerbomb on Droz but botched the move, dropping him on his head, fracturing 2 discs in his neck. It was a tragic incident that was never aired on TV. And the single most tragic event to ever occur at a live event, the death of Owen Hart, still resonates deeply with wrestling fans who remember a man who was taken too soon due to a terrible accident. At the Over the Edge pay-per-view event in May 1999, Hart was due to arrive into the ring for his match against The Godfather via a cable from the ceiling. Hart was strapped into a harness for the stunt and was to rappel down into the ring. The harness failed and Hart fell 78 feet from the ceiling, killing him. At home, the accident was not aired live as a pre-taped interview segment featuring Hart was playing at the time, but 16,000 fans witnessed the fatal accident in the arena. They stood largely silent as EMTs stretchered him away. On commentary, Jim Ross sadly stated that Hart had passed away. He would later say it was the most difficult thing he'd ever had to do.